Well, good evening, listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Always a gift to be able to talk with you. And today I have Marni Kagan. She is a matchmaker in New York City, which is really crazy because I recently watched Materialists. For those of you, I know some of the audience have watched it before, but for those of you who haven't, I found it a really neat film. I don't know how accurate it is to matchmaking, which is something I'll talk to Marnie about a little bit, but it definitely had some profound topics about dating and love, and I think a lot of things that single women especially would find really interesting and encouraging and perhaps thought-provoking. But Marnie this is what she does, and she's been doing it since 2008. And she is a professional matchmaker. She has her own company, she does it herself, and she um, crazily as well left being an attorney to do this, which is really funny because I mean, I have, in my experience with attorneys, they have never been very empathetic souls. And so it's really interesting for me that she became a matchmaker because none of the attorneys I have met would consider something like that. Um, so I'm really excited to dive into this episode with her. So, Marnie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I've got to ask you, I don't know, I've worked for male attorneys and work for male attorneys, and maybe it's just a female, maybe it's a difference in the genders, I don't know, but I've never met an attorney who is specifically emotionally very in tune. They were very smart, and you could ask them any question about law or they could do anything and they're super smart. But when it came to like emotional intelligence, like it was kind of not it was kind of low just in their personality. So I wanted to ask like how did that happen for you that you transitioned and were like, yeah, I really would love to be a matchmaker now?
Yeah, great question. I get that a lot. I think a part about being the attorneys, I think the nature of the field, you have to be a certain way. It's a very pragmatic, practical kind of approach to whatever issue that they're dealing with, whether you're a litigator or a corporate attorney. So I think it comes from a more like cerebral, intellectual place. Not to say that there isn't that emotional awareness, but it doesn't lend itself to whatever that issue might be coming up in law, if that makes sense. So even though I haven't been practicing in many years, I'll say a good word for the attorney crowd because I do think that, usually when an attorney is involved, it tends to not be a good thing going on, and they have to
Right.
separate the emotion from, the facts and the practical aspect of that. But yeah, I did leave the law. I'll give you the abridged version. I didn't ever think that I would go into matchmaking. If you had told me that, early on in my legal career, or even up until when I left, I would have thought you were crazy. I didn't know much about matchmaking. It wasn't something I always thought I would be a matchmaker. But a conversation that I had with a single male friend one night, we were talking about dating in New York and the challenges and how hard it can be for men and women. And I was kind of giving him some advice. And well, I'll backtrack. He happened to be my friend, but also my neighbor. And I used to throw a lot of parties. And I used to invite him over to my parties, and he would let me put my furniture in his apartment. So I'd move out my coffee table, my nights, all the things that I could get out of my living room to open it up for people. He was always willing to let me do that. And then he would come in and meet all sorts of great people. And he got to meet a very diverse crowd too. So he knew that I was a people person and really loved to bring people together. So when we were talking about dating and we were talking about the old school, Match.com. Now the apps didn't exist then, but this was the old school online dating. And he had not been on any of them. And I was telling him, well, you got to get out. How are you going to meet people? He worked in a very male dominated industry, something to do with steel or something. And I started to give him advice because I had tried it briefly and it was not for me. I found there was a lot of misrepresentation, photos, people lying about their age, their height, whatever. So I was kind of telling him like some, advice about how to recognize when people are misrepresenting themselves. And then I said very offhandedly, I should start my own business. I could improve upon, everything that's out there. But I didn't say it like I actually thought I was going to do that. It was just like, I should run for president. I could fix, the economy. Just very
Yeah.
like that. And then he looked at me very seriously and he said, why don't you? You're the one person I know who could be really good at this. You're so social, you're so good with people, you have such a large network. And then we didn't stay on the topic. We went on to many different topics at the dinner. But the next day I went into work and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I thought maybe I should do this. Like, I don't know, I think I could do this. And I got home and I kind of typed up a business plan and it kind of took life. And then I said, I'm gonna do this. My parents were not thrilled, to be honest. They were like, you went to great school, you're doing so well at your law firm, maybe you just burnt out. And I said, no, this is like really what I want to do. And that was 17 years ago. So it's worked out and they finally, got on board. They started to see I was in the newspaper for some of my marriages and, lots of press and had a beautiful office and some employees at one point. And they said, okay, this is really where she feels passionate about. And then they were really, they were always very proud, but I think they understood that there is a need for this and she's good at it.
Is there an aspect of being an attorney that crossed over really well for you, like experience-wise, into being a matchmaker?
Absolutely. I think having a legal background helps in so many ways, in so many different careers. For me, I think that I just got well, just from basic contracts I ever have to negotiate or anything like that, but also to just kind of being able to like get to the heart of something. I'm a very detail-oriented person, and I think when you practice in a law firm, you're held to like a high standard of professionalism and things you need to do. So whether it's just always being responsive to people or getting back to people quickly, those kind of habits are always there. But I think also just like kind of sniffing out the BS a little bit and kind of really being able, I was a litigator. So, you have to really be listening. I am a bit of a talker, I admit, but I'm also a really keen listener. And people are always surprised at things I remember from conversations way back, or even just I'm listening to not just what's being said, but also what's not being said. And sometimes you get as much information from that. And I'm really attuned to words and how people express themselves and what they choose to say. And I'm not trying to dissect everything they say, but I'm really listening to help me kind of figure out one, just like their personality and who could be a match. And also sometimes, frankly, to sift through some of the, I don't know, the nonsense. I don't know how else to call it and really get to the essence of things. So I definitely think, I practiced for 10 years that all of those skills come into play in what I do.
Yeah. Did you find, is there a client though now that you wouldn't take on? Like, can you know in advance when you talk with them and get to know them? Is there like something where you're like, okay, I know they're just not going to be a good fit?
Absolutely. When you start, any business, there is a learning curve, and you don't really know exactly. It's, a little trial and error in the beginning. So in the beginning, I was very excited, obviously, to start this new business and help everyone. I think over time, I learned there's some people that they just wouldn't be a fit. I mean, the matchmaker and the client have to be a match. So that's number one, just personality wise. And sometimes I've talked to people and I've thought we're not a fit. And I'll even say that to them. We are not a match. So there's that. And that can be for all hosts of reasons. I remember talking to a guy years ago, even just from his email, the way he expressed what he was looking for, it rubbed me the wrong way. I found him to be kind of arrogant. I got on the phone with him, and within 5 minutes, I just said, I can't work with this person. I wouldn't know the right women for him. There wasn't a lot that was likable about him other than his pedigree. And I said that to him. I said, I don't think we're a fit. And he was stunned because I don't think anyone ever told him, no. But I just thought, I don't know women who would take to this guy, and I'm not going to do that. So it's one, the matchmaker and the client have to really get each other and work well together. And then there are just people, sometimes I just don't know the right people for them. And that's just based on my network, who I think would fit within the people that I know. And a lot of times, the matchmakers, clients, my network is very diverse and not everyone's like me, but there's a lot of overlap. My clientele and my network tends to be, well-educated professionals, worldly, cosmopolitan, not arrogant or pretentious, but just people very interesting people who are accomplished in a lot of ways and very likable people and people that I would want to work with. It's such a personal undertaking. If you don't care for your client, it's just very difficult. I have to be able to rave about my clients. I have to be able to sing their praises in a very, accurate, not a hyperbolic way, but be able to rave about them. And if I don't feel that I can do that and say positive things about them, I wouldn't take them. And then also there are occasions where I hear things from people and I just think it's not realistic and their expectations are not realistic. And I just don't think that I can coach them to get there. There is a lot of coaching that goes into what I do. And it's part and parcel with everybody. I think everyone can benefit from coaching and everyone can work on whatever it's dating, work, relationships, family relationships, friendships. I think we should always be striving to learn more about ourselves and be the best version of ourselves. But there are times when you just know, I don't think this person is someone I can coach to get there. And so if I hear something that really makes me worry and I just don't think they're realistic in their expectations, I would not take that person on. And in fact, I can think of an example of this a few years back. I had a client, I had set her up with someone, they were doing great. And her friend reached out to me. She said, "Oh, so and so raved about you. She really loves you. And she's so happy with the person you introduced her to." And she wanted to be, go forward. And I told her about the coaching. I said, everybody gets coaching. It comes with, hands in hand with what I do. And she said, well, I don't need the coaching. I just want, access to your network. And I said, everyone benefits from coaching. I said, why don't you speak to a former client of mine, even though she already had her friend as, endorsing me. I said, talk to someone else I think can sing my praises and tell you about the experience even better than I can. Why don't you speak to another client? And the client spoke with her and of course was very happy because she had also had success working with me. And she came back and she said the same thing. She said, I want to work with you. I'm excited, but I don't need any coaching. And just saying that again, I just said, you know what? You seem wonderful. I hope you find your person, but this is not going to have success. If you don't think you need any coaching, and I'll be honest, she was in her early 40s and single and wanting to have a family. And I just thought, well, I'll go back. I actually had set up with one of my male clients first, so I knew certain things that she could actually use coaching on. But just the fact that she still hadn't attained her goal and wanted to have a family, in her early 40s, I think it kind of speaks for itself that there was some coaching, whatever that might be, whether that's anything that someone's doing on a date that can be corrected, or whether it's picking the wrong people. There are patterns sometimes where people don't know what to look for. Just everyone benefits from coaching. And when I got that again, same response, I just said, I don't think we're a fit and I wish you luck. And the friend that had referred her to me said she really appreciated you being honest. And I said, I don't need that. That's like going to be banging my head against the wall every day. If someone is not receptive to the coaching, it's not going to be a success.
So just to clarify for listeners and for myself, when you mean coaching, for instance, if someone comes to you, they're in their early 40s, they want to have a family, right? My first thought is they're in their early 40s, so they're probably not going to have children. Now they could, but um it's potentially could be very hard. Like they could try, but it could potentially be very hard and there could be a lot of complications. If they do have children, by the time they meet the person, date them for a while, it went well, they get married, maybe one. Like if they did, right? And then my next thought is, okay, well, and I don't blame anyone for wanting this because I think a lot of women want it, and I have friends that are in their late 40s, early 40s, and they're not married and they don't have kids, and it's hard for them. But I think another thing that comes to mind for me is, are they going to meet a guy who's in his 40s who also will want children? Because, I mean, if someone's in their 40s and they're a guy, they're more settled, right? Life's kind of going along. I guess it would, and I guess you know more about this, but my first instinct is just I'm not sure they'd meet someone who would be totally on the same page of like, let's have a family like right away and stuff. Because usually when you're older, in that sense, you're more settled, you have money, you're doing well in life, and you also just are living the way you would like to, and having children and all this would be a huge change. But I don't know. I mean, when you say coaching, what exactly do you coach? Like those kind of expectations or?
Yeah, I'll walk you through some of the things that we cover in the coaching. I just want to say here in New York, it's a little bit of a different animal than I think in other places in the country because the age of getting married throughout the United States has been, pushed back over the decades, right? Like my parents got married at like 21, something like that, 22. And that's very young at this now. I think back again, 40, 50 years ago, people met in their early 20s, they got married. Whereas now
Right.
it's a little bit further back, but in New York, even more so. And there's so many reasons for that. I could take the whole podcast to get into that, so I won't do that. But there are a lot of reasons for that. So, it's not uncommon to have people, late 30s, early 40s, finally looking, to like get settled down and meet their partner. And especially now where so many women have frozen their eggs, which is so common. And, really I'm hearing it more and more, even by women in their 20s, freezing their eggs just as like a safety net. And even some companies are paying for it, So I
Okay.
think,
Can
and I
I ask in New York, are there, because like in Virginia, I've not heard of any companies that will pay for a woman to freeze her eggs. Do they do that a lot in New York City?
I don't know if it's a lot. I can't say that, but I have heard of people's companies paying for it.
Okay.
So I don't know
Wow.
if it's as frequent, but I have heard about it. But where women just do it on their own and they choose to do that. And I also kind of feel like it's a little bit of it's tricky because sometimes when you have these eggs out there sitting there, you feel like a sense of security, but it's not foolproof. And it doesn't mean take another decade, to meet your partner. And I think it gets tricky. Regarding the coaching, it encompasses all sorts of things. So for some people, if there's a wide range, some people need more, some people need less, but I think everyone benefits from it. So it could be anything like I hear feedback after someone's date. So I'll hear both sides, after the date, how'd it go? If they both had a great time and they want to go out again, I'd love to hear all the good stuff. If one person is interested and the other one is not, I want to hear from the person who's not interested so I can go back to my client and share whatever helpful feedback they have. And sometimes it's very easy to tweak. Okay, I didn't know I was doing that. I didn't even realize I was doing that. Not gonna do it again. For example, I mean, such small things. I could write a book on this, and I want to. But one of my clients years ago, he went out with a woman. They went out for drinks, and I think then they were going for dinner. And like he was walking ahead of her, and it bothered her. And after the date, she said, I felt like I was walking by myself. He was like several steps ahead of me. And I mentioned it to him. I said, that doesn't make the woman feel like protected, like that you care. He was interested in her. It wasn't like he wasn't interested. But you're ahead of her. It's a little rude. And it doesn't give that sense of like, I'm with you and I want to protect you. Not that women need protecting, but I think people like old school, chivalry. And he said, oh, my family always gets on my case about this. They always tell me to slow down. I was like, listen to your family. And your family is one thing, but on a date, it's off-putting, So that's like a very small thing. So sometimes I get like really small things like that. Conversation that can be a little negative or a joke that's not appropriate, let's just say, or dark humor. I've had that, or table manners. I mean, just silly things. Then to like bigger things like talking about exes on your date, which people do. And I'm like, why are you doing that? No one wants to hear about your ex-girlfriend or your ex-boyfriend. Save that down the road if you're hitting it off. People talk about their relationship history, but why would you talk about that on your first date? To really depressing topics or someone talking about how they hate their sister-in-law. I've had someone say that's what he talked about the whole time. I felt like I was in a therapy session. And these are like nice, normal people. They're not socially awkward people, but they just sometimes they don't I say sometimes it's kind of like an interview. You're not going to just say, everything that comes to your mind if you want to get a job. You have to, I can
Yeah.
say like, my job and that's why I'm looking for a new job. You come up with a more, I don't know, diplomatic, if that's the right word, but a reason that's more palatable. So that's kind of the same thing. I just tell people to be mindful of how much you're, disclosing and sharing on your first date. No one wants to hear your problem. Everyone's got problems, right? A date should be an escape. It should be fun. You should be laughing. So when you start talking about, you hate work or you hate your family member or whomever, you're bringing people down, and it's TMI early on. Um, Coaching can be expectations. There's no perfect people in this world. And I'll say to my clients, you're wonderful, but you have your flaws. You have to be willing to accept someone else's flaws. And if you wait for perfection, you might end up alone because, New York is a place where everyone's always kind of like achieving, it's like draws people who are, type A achievers. And so
Sure.
I think sometimes it's hard for some people to accept some flaws. I think there's always like that mindset of like big and bigger, better that could come along. So there's some psychological component in that too, just like recognizing what's most important. Don't give me a laundry list of 20 or 30 things of criteria on your checklist that have to be met. Think of the core things and work off that.
Well, one thing I want to add, and I'm just thinking of is you mentioned it's earlier on in your story about like someone walking in front of a woman, which I mean, I could see how that would be really rude. I mean, you could just be a really fast walker, right? But still, I mean,
Yeah.
you usually want to be in sync with the
Yeah.
person you're talking to so that they feel like they're part of the conversation and in your bubble. But one thing I would say I'd have to ask you is, wouldn't it just be better to encourage the woman to say to him, "Hey, that really is kind of rude and hurtful to me. Can you understand or see from my perspective how if you're walking ahead from me like that, that makes me feel this way?" Because I I think your coaching sounds so valuable, but if everyone's telling you the problems and then
Right.
you relate them to the next person, do they get to work on communication where they get to say to them like, "Hey, this is bothering me. Can we work on it?"
Absolutely. I've also coached people to be able to speak up for themselves in a date and say exactly what you just said. Um, I don't have too many like horror story. I don't have any horror story dates, but I don't have any like bad date stories really, other than a couple, and they're not so bad. I mean, I really screen and vet people. So by the time my client's in front of the date, everything, I've met that person, I meet everyone I set up, I find out all the core information. So I don't have like these terrible stories, and the few bad stories I have are de minimis. But this one, I put that in this next story in like the handful of things that aren't wonderful. One of my clients went out with someone who I'd met. He seemed like such a thoughtful, nice, good guy, very polite and sweet. They went on a date, and at some point, and I didn't know this till like after the fact, he got into like sexual conversation with her. And she was not comfortable with it. And
Hmm.
she stayed on the date for a while. Um, and she told me about it after. And I said, next time you just say, I don't think that's appropriate for a date conversation. I said, and
Hmm.
then you excuse yourself. If he continues to go there, then you just say, you know what, I have to call it a night. Thank you so much for the drinks or whatever. And to speak up for yourselves. And so I said that next time, if that ever happens again, it's literally the first time it's ever happened to me in all my time of matchmaking that someone has kind of inappropriately brought up like sexual topics on the first date. She wasn't comfortable with it. Maybe other women wouldn't care, but she didn't like it. And I said, you have to use your voice. Um, and I say that because I have a client I've been working with, and she said to me, she said, my mother loves you. She said, she has seen a difference in me since I've started working with you. I'm more confident. I'm able to express my needs and wants better and communicate better. And so it's something I do address with my clients. There's so many topics that come up. It's hard to like address everything, like how you can,
Sure.
speak to this or that. So it's more of like an overriding uh, advice or coaching I give. If it's something is going on a date that you don't like, excuse yourself politely and leave. Either one, try and fix it, but if it's something that has really been off-putting to you, you don't have to stay. Years ago, I set up a client. This was like my first year in business. The date was like 3 hours. She worked in the entertainment space, and the person I set her up with did as well. And after the date, she said, it wasn't really a great date because all he wanted to talk about was like networking and who I knew and so forth. And I said, well, did you try and change the topic? And she said, I kind of did, but he wouldn't, move on. And I said, you're a big girl. You just say, you know what? Enough shop talk. What are you doing for this August? What are your holiday plans? You change you're not a passive person on your date. It's
Hmm.
goes two ways. So speak up and try and change the topic, either subtly or not so subtly. And if they are fixated on that, because he wasn't interested in her romantically, I mean, that was the outcome of it. So, and from what I understand in the entertainment space, there's a lot of that, like, who can you connect me to and who do you know? I said, don't stay on a date for 3 hours if that's where it's going, if it's becoming a network meeting. After an hour, I think under an hour, it can be a little rude to leave unless there's something like horribly wrong. I said, but then you just call it a day.
Yeah.
This thing these are skills that you develop as you date. And I said, so next time, don't stay there if he's going to continue to do that. And he wasn't interested in going out again. I mean, I could give you so many stories of this, but as far as not like bad stories, but just about my coaching, how do you handle certain situations? Divorce clients
You're,
have
well, I was gonna say you're almost outside of just like the dating scope. It's almost like you're trying to help people with healthy communication. So even if they don't
100%.
end up maybe it doesn't work out, none of your clients match up, they still will be much more equipped for communication in general. But I wanted to ask, is does that ever surprise you though? Because like some of the things you're saying, and I don't want to be judgmental here, just forgive me,
Yeah,
but like it sounds so like of
like
course, like
obvious. I
yeah, like
know.
if some guy to like my first date is like talking about sexual stuff with me, I'm gonna be like, I'm done. Like I'll be like,
Yeah,
hey, I don't even know you, so bye.
yeah.
And then like another thing too is like if somebody's um just like things with like conversation, because I've been on dates where like the conversation wasn't really, I wasn't vibing with it, and afterwards I just decided in my mind, I'm not going to go on a date again. And the guy asked me again. I said, you know what? You're a nice guy. Like, I really think you're great. But we don't have the same thing going. I'm not really interested in these things. And I know that if we just kept going, it wouldn't change. And so I
Right,
just want to be honest with you about that. But like, of course, you always feel bad. I think that just naturally happens when, at least for me, when I had to tell somebody, I'm not interested because I hate seeing the downfall in their face
right,
and all that. But some of the things you're saying, I'm like, they seem so rudimentary. And I'm thinking,
right.
if you're in your 30s and 40s, in New York City especially, where people are doing this big stuff, I would think they would know that already, like just from working in
Sure. Well,
business.
so that story about the sex, I don't even know. I couldn't even tell you how many dates I've set up over the years. So many. That's the only time that's ever happened. So I kind of led with like a kind of an outlier. But what's more common is, for example, I was going to say divorce clients. Always the first thing they want to do when I set them up with another divorced individual, what happened in your marriage? Why didn't it work out? I mean, it's like the default conversation from the beginning. And that's something I coach people before they have their very first setup. And we talk about like over a big overview.
Okay.
And I talk about not discussing, exes and so forth until further down or what happened in your marriage. And even though I say that, it still comes up sometimes by my clients and sometimes on the other side. But when my clients will say, well, they brought it up, I don't know how to answer. Or so I'm kind of preemptive with my coaching before they even go on their date. I'll say, then you just say, you know what, I'd happily tell you about that at some point down the road. If we go out again, we can get into that. I'd love to learn about you. I'd rather talk about you and learn about you than talk about my ex, husband or ex-wife. So I try and give them tools to like, you don't have to get sucked into that conversation. And it's something when I tell you these are very savvy people, do nicely at their jobs, social, they're not socially awkward. I don't take on clients like that. Honestly, in the beginning, I did a little bit because I thought I could, help them, but I kind of know how much I can do and what I can't do. But just anyone you would know, but still kind of do this kind of same thing and not, again, not learning how to like change the conversation. I don't think it's a good use of people's time on their first date to be talking about their ex-husbands or their ex-wives. It's not a
Right.
happy topic for starters, typically. And I'm already sharing the basics prior to the date. For
Okay.
example, telling someone, I'll say he's divorced, he has two kids, he was married for X amount of time, they've been divorced 10 years, amicable divorce, just they grew apart. I'm giving people that insight so they don't need to get into that on their date. But as many times as I tell people, or try and coach them that, it still can happen. People just go that path. So some of those things are kind of obvious. It can change to even how to like flirt on your date. I mean, that honestly, I see sometimes, women who, they have like a corporate job or something. They're very,
Yeah.
intense at work and then they'll go on their date and I think they bring some of that energy into the date, especially if both people like are working in finance or something. And they're having great conversation, but then I'll hear from the guy and sometimes he'll say, she was lovely, but I didn't feel a spark or something. And I'll even hear sometimes the guy's like, I couldn't even tell if she was interested in me, and I think men need
Oh.
that encourage, like they need throw them a bone, like show them
Yeah.
that you have some interest and the woman will be interested, but they don't like, well, I'm like, you don't have to make out on the date, but I don't know, like just even touching someone gently on their arm, like coming into their space a little bit, making it not like at one time I had a client, she was lovely, she worked in HR and almost every person who met her, the feedback was like, she was so nice, but I didn't feel a spark. And I said to her, it's like you're getting colleague energy on your dates. You know, that's a different energy. If you're out with having a nice drink with a colleague, there's an energy versus a date. And I said, so you need to flirt a little. And that's smiling, maybe in a playful comment, just body language. I've given my clients books on body language to learn how to interpret someone else's body language and to be very aware of their own body language. I've given my clients books on flirting, books on kind of soul searching, who's your match and how do you focus on it. Some of these books are more like how to, and some are more kind of just like big picture. So there's sometimes I send my clients books. I for guy clients, I've booked them appointments at the hair salons because their hair is like not working for them and they need a new look. Shopping with some of my clients to, get like first date attire. So it really runs the gamut, the coaching. I've been a wing woman for people, go out to an event, just say we're friends and help them, connect. Because, one thing I do notice, and I don't think this is just a New York thing, a lot of people will go to events like charity events or social events with the intent to meet people. But then they end up just talking to the person they went with,
Yeah.
and sometimes even like their body language, the arms will be crossed or they don't seem very approachable. And I'll tell you one real quick story, which I really love the story. One of my clients, she kind of, when she wasn't engaged in a conversation, she had what they call like resting bitch face, so,
I have that.
um,
I have to work
yeah,
hard not to have that.
so I ended up, we had a lunch and I said, look, I've noticed that when you're, look, because I throw a lot of events, when you're not engaged, you don't seem very approachable. So the women that tend to get more, hit on or more connections, it's not because they're the most gorgeous person always. It's because they give out the signals that says it's okay to come talk to me. I'm going to be friendly and nice and welcoming. So I said, just be mindful, like smile more and you know, show that you're approachable. So that was a conversation on a Friday. And I kid you not, Monday she reached out to me and she said, I met someone over the weekend on the subway, which is the hardest place in New York to meet somebody. And no, I mean, you can see some guy that you think is cute or a woman you think, but you just don't want to, you don't talk to people on the subway really.
Yeah.
Um, and so she said started talking to me and he said, look, I never do this. I never approached someone on the subway. He said, but you just seem really warm and I felt like it would be okay. And they went from the subway to get drinks. I remember it was a Father's Day. So they were coming back. They were both lived on Long Island. They were taking the subway from Penn Station back, into the city. And I mean, in Penn Station, to their respective neighborhoods. And they went for drinks after. And I wish I could say they got married. It doesn't end with anything like that. I know a couple of days and that was it. But I said to her, I said, just from giving you that advice to implementation, you met somebody because it really is being very aware of like the energy you're putting out and receptiveness. And I thought that was such a great example of just small adjustments and being aware of that can, help you meet people.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really neat. I'm sad they didn't get married. I was hoping you were
Yeah.
going to end with that.
I have other good stories that end with marriages, but that's not one of them.
Um, I do want to ask you, this is something in Materialist that came up, and I wanted to ask you about this because you've been talking about, I'm thinking about divorcees, and I mean, I come from a family where my parents divorced, and there was definitely it was a very toxic divorce, and I would definitely say there was one party that was more at fault than the other, and I think it would have been great and more useful information for any other people going forward to know about that. But um, one thing that came to mind when you're talking about that is in Materialists, there's this client that works a long time with the matchmaker. Matchmaker really likes her. She's a really sweet girl. She's not super pretty. She's not like a Marilyn Monroe or anything. She's an average girl who's just looking for some guy that will love her and take care of her and they can have a family. And she vets a lot of different guys for this girl. She goes on different dates, but they just all don't work out. And finally, she vets her with someone who seems to work really well, but then he ends up raping her on the date.
Oh
And
my
it's
God.
totally unexpected because the matchmaker like had vetted him, did everything, and then it comes out that and then he does this and then he also then afterwards he starts stalking her and the client blames the matchmaker and wants to take legal action against the matchmaking company because she said it was their fault that this happened to her. And I had no idea if this was real or not because I mean, obviously it's a movie, but that's was like I was gonna ask you because you could meet someone super charming and like they could be a total narcissist. And like, what if they like meet up with somebody and then, something terrible happens? Like, I've wondered, like, could that happen scenario, or is that like not really realistic?
I suppose it could happen. I mean, that makes my, couple of inappropriate comments look like nothing because that's hard. I have not seen the movie, which I do plan on seeing it. So, my worst story is the inappropriate, couple sexual, questions. I think, like I said, I do a lot of vetting and often the people I set up, I know people in common with. Not always, but it tends to be that someone's sending like their cousin or their brother or their close work friends. So there's already a level of like inherent vetting in that. But I also am very, I tell my clients, and they're pretty savvy, like don't go back with somebody too early. I always coach them like, I don't really have to coach them about street smarts because I'm in New York and people just inherently, I think, are kind of like that. But that's just a horrible story. I think it could happen. I think certainly on the, apps, I've heard so many like terrible stories like that. But I think with matchmaking, by and large, I mean, I've never heard of it through anybody that I know in this space. But again, I tell my clients like, don't go home with anyone too soon. Partially not because of being, violated or anything like that. It's more like expectations. And I do coach people to hold off as long as possible to becoming intimate. I'm not saying months, but like numerous dates because I coach, people like you. I remember having a conversation with a guy client who was trying to make things happen a little faster with someone I set him up with, and they, said, I'm not ready to go there. And I said, savor this early part of dating. It's so
Mm.
special. Once you're intimate, like you have the whole, if you guys are really a match, you have forever to have, great chemistry and everything. But early on, you only get one beginning part of a relationship, and it's so exciting and it's so special. Don't rush it. Really enjoy the buildup.
Yeah.
And I used to have a radio show, and John Gray came on it from the author of Men Are From Mars and Men Are From Venus. And we talked about, sleeping with some, I mean, some people will say, oh, that's, you know, so old school, like who we're, I'm a sexual being. Why can't I sleep with someone on a first date? And I'm not into the old rules, or, someone likes me, why play games? A lot of conversations like that. And it's not about being, Puritan or anything. It's not about that. It's more about, having a bond, like a solid foundation
Yeah.
that then when you become intimate, it's even more beautiful. But if you don't really know somebody and you sleep together too soon, I mean, it just changes things, and people don't think it will, but it will. And I remember I had a client a few years ago, and I gave her my coaching. Numerous dates. You should have a conversation about whether you're exclusive. I think that's very important. And if someone feels uncomfortable having that conversation, then maybe you shouldn't be sleeping with that person. If you can't even ask them, like, are you going out with anybody else? Are you sleeping with anybody else? So anyway, I had told her to hold off. People in New York, I think the third date's like the magic number. I don't know if it's like that in Virginia, but I think
It
the
kind of is, yeah.
the girls have been kind of been like brainwashed to believe that. But I think that is a little too soon. I do. I think that when you're looking for a spouse, you want to have fun, do whatever you want. But when you're really trying to bond and have a partnership, so I gave this coaching to this woman. She didn't listen to me. On the third date, they slept together and everything changed immediately. And I knew the guy. She was my client. The guy was not. And he really liked her. When I spoke to him after the first date, he was talking in a way like this could be my future wife. And then things changed and he reached out to me and he said, Marni, can you talk? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I feel like I'm in Insta relationship now. Like now there's all this expectations and guilt if I'm not free on Saturday or if I have to do something. He goes, I
Mm.
liked her, but I'm feeling so much pressure. And so even
Wow.
if you've been saying, oh, I can be casual about it, I don't know. I haven't really seen that. I think once you're intimate, there are expectations and it changes the dynamic. And that didn't go anywhere. I think they had one more date and it was over. And I don't like blame him. I just feel I don't blame anyone. I just think it was unfortunate. I wish
Yeah.
he had just waited. So I think once the bond is there, then, then hopefully there's great chemistry and you can go from there. But I think when you sleep together before you really know each other, I haven't really seen it ever work out like, that great. So
Yeah, and I hear in your voice and what you're saying, you're just saying this based on experience. You're not trying to be like, I can hear in your voice you're saying this is what I've seen happens. And so
yeah,
I'm just encouraging you.
Exactly. No
rethink
judgment.
it.
And I tell my clients, I'm not here to judge. We're a team. Like I'm on your team. So it's
Yeah.
just guiding you to be more strategic, really, about one more story on this topic. There was a woman I had set her up with someone. She liked him. I said, you should really know like where things stand before you're intimate, just to know. You have every right to ask that question. If you think you're being naggy or going to turn someone off, then he's not your person. So, but they did, sleep together. They never had the conversation. I'm checking in on her 3 months in or 4 months in. How are things going? And she said, everything is great. But there's only one thing. He never refers to me as like his girlfriend. He calls me like his lady friend on the phone with his friends. Like she said, I heard him talking to a friend. He's like, what are you doing this weekend? And these people are in their, mid 30s. They're not teens, They don't need a label to have a label, but she wanted to know. And I said, I think you need to ask him. You need to have a direct conversation with him. And then she asked him, and he said, no, we're not exclusive. I don't feel like I know you well enough to be exclusive with you. She was devastated, and I felt so bad for her.
Ugh.
And so I say this out of care and concern for my clients. I don't want them to be heartbroken. I don't to me, it's more about being smart and protecting yourself. And you can't unring that bell. I mean, once you sleep together, that's happened. And then if you're going to ask after the fact, you just lose a lot of that like leverage to know.
Oh yeah.
Um, Now it's a little too late. So, I'm happy to say that ended in a happy story because I introduced her to her husband and they're married and have two little girls now. So, she met her person, but it was a tough lesson for her to learn. Like, and again, I'm not a dictator, but I give this advice, like hopefully you'll follow it. You've come to me for my expertise and what I've seen and to help you. And she said, all right, I got to listen to you going forward because that wasn't, so fun for her.
So do you walk alongside a client until marriage? Or is there like,
So, like most matchmakers, there's a definitive time frame to work together, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year. And all the goal is to introduce them to their partner during that period of time. Sometimes they meet that person in that time, and sometimes they renew to work to continue going. And people can put their membership on hold. So if they meet somebody and things are going great, they can kind of toll their time. But I'm still like a resource for them. I am someone, after the first fight, I usually get called to hear, how it happened, how did they handle it. And I always kind of say you're not a real couple until you've had at least one disagreement or fight and see how people communicate and how they handle, conflict. So, and I've been able to say, I see her side or I see his side. I'm not their mother or their best friend. I'm more objective and I can say, actually, I think he's got a point here and let's talk it through. So there's almost a role that matchmakers play as a little bit of like therapist,
yes, I'm hearing that. Yeah.
and being like a sounding board. So I think, until I mean I've had people they were dating, they were about to move in together and then they broke up, and that's tough. I mean, I've had many relationships, they go a year, 2 years, but they don't go the distance for all sorts of reasons, and so I'm kind of in the beginning, I'm checking in regularly. How's it going? Trying to avoid any negative patterns that may start. Are there any flags that you want to discuss? And and sometimes I don't get looped in until it's a little like I had one client I set up with someone, she was head over heels for him. Things were great for like the first 6 to 8 months. And then she said, hey, can we talk? And I said, sure. And we got coffee. And she said, these are some things that I'm not loving now about this relationship. And when I heard it, I said, I don't think he's your person. And I think you need to get out of this. And it was my setup. Obviously I want them to get married and have a family, but only if it's right. And she was telling me he was like very critical of her. There were some things that he was not like for the first 6 months. And he was such a likable guy, but I think he wasn't supportive. She was, I don't know, I feel like her self-esteem was kind of getting eroded a little bit. And I said, you need someone who's going to really be much kinder and thoughtful about how he speaks to you and all of that. And she did break up with him. And she met someone after that, not through me, on her own. And they're very, very happy. But I didn't say, oh, no one's perfect. You're being too difficult or too picky or unreasonable. I said, I don't like what I'm hearing. I think you deserve better than that.
That must be really hard though, to be the person to say that because I even know, even as a friend, I've had people come to me, just as a friend and say, this is what's going on with this guy. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is just not right.
Yeah.
That's just, you should just say no, right? And so maybe you're brave enough to say that. but maybe you're not. And I've been guilty of not being brave enough to say that. And you're kind of like, well, maybe. And then you're trying to think of some sort of excuse. And then you just see your friend getting more miserable and you don't say anything. And you're like, I think it's because of this relationship they're in. But like the fact that because you get invested with these people, you care about them, you want them to find the person they can live life with. But you also have to be the person to say, maybe countless times, like, we need to go back to the drawing board again. And I hate to do this to you, but I feel like that must be really hard because you can also get them upset and they'll be like, well, you set me up with this person, and I thought this would work out. And
Well, sometimes I set up someone I've known for years and I know this person very well. But sometimes I've met someone through connection. I had a coffee with them and screened them for an hour or two. But at some point, my client knows this person much better than I know them. I don't, once they're in a serious relationship with them, people obviously lead with their best foot forward as a whole. And even in that instance, he was Prince Charming for 6 months. So, she did not blame me. There was no like, well, you set me up with him. I set her up with someone she was attracted to, who was quality, who she liked, and then they went from there. But relationships, have their own trajectories, and sometimes it takes 6 months or more to see someone's true colors or things change. I'm not. I think what you said about like a friend saying something that could be tricky because if they stay with that person, you don't want to alienate your friend, and then they're like, oh, she doesn't like my partner, and it might be awkward. They might even push you away if a family member or friend tells someone they don't care for how their partner is treating them. But fortunately, that's not my role. I have like a friendship with a lot of clients. I mean, even at my own wedding, 5 of my clients came to my wedding because became so close. I've been to many of my clients' weddings. But I'm still someone that I can be a little bit more, impartial and kind of weigh in. Another
maybe
time,
that's some of the attorney side coming in too.
I think, well, sometimes people accuse me, I can be kind of like brutally honest, but but I'm not brutal. I'm very delicate, but I'm going to say what I see. And in that instance, I just thought this is not good. I don't want her to be with someone who doesn't treat her right. And yes, everyone wants to meet someone. They want to get married, maybe have a family. Not everyone. Someone doesn't want to get married, no problem there. But the people who come to me, that's what tends to be what they want. I have no problem. If someone doesn't want to have a family, that's everyone's choices. But people who come to me are looking to get married and have a family by and large. And I'm just trying to have them think about like the long run. I'll tell them like this may be appealing now, but when you're married, it's going to be less relevant. Look at the qualities that are attractive in a husband, wife, partner. I've had people say, oh, he's so much fun. He knows all the cool places in the city, this and that. I'm like, that's wonderful. But when you're married and kids, you're not going to be, I mean, yes, you still go out on date nights and you do things, but that's less relevant. Look for the qualities like he's reliable, he's consistent, he's got good values, that I'm trying to direct them to focus on those things. I was going to just tell you one other quick story. I had a client, she was lovely, one of my favorite people, and beautiful, smart, divorced, no kids, wanted to get remarried and have a family. The very first person I set her up with, they went out with many times, like 10 times. And he was so good to her. He adored her. And she met all his friends, and he was all the things that she said on her, checklist that she wanted. But every date, I would say, checking in, how to go, how was your second date, third date, and said all these wonderful things about him. But she said she still felt like something was like missing. And then he went overseas for his business for like a month, and he wanted to fly her to come spend time with him in Europe. And she said, I don't know if I should go. And I said, well, do you miss him? And she said, I really don't. I said, well, then this is not your guy because
Yeah.
you missed him this early on. And I know I could have said, as I think some matchmakers have a different, method, you're 38, you want to get married, he's cute, he's smart, he's all the things you said. But I didn't say that to her. I said, I don't want you to just get married, even if he fits your checklist. The big picture is you're not feeling it for some reason. You're not feeling it. And I would break up with him before he even comes back from Europe because he's like pining away for you and you're not feeling it. And she did. And 3 dates later was her husband. I introduced her to her husband, and they are married and have two boys. So I was not like proud of myself, but I was like, I don't want to take the easy way out, even though it was my setup. And be like, oh, he's great. Keep going. Keep spending time with him. I felt you should want to, miss your partner, kiss your partner, feel something in the beginning. It's not always going to be butterflies and easy. Marriage is hard. Relationships are hard. But if you're not feeling that at this juncture, I'm like, he's just not your guy. And again, literally 3 days later, she was over the moon. There were no, reservations. And actually after their first date, he went away for 2 weeks, this subsequent setup. And she had like one more date, but then she missed him and he came back and then the rest is history. But she had that feeling, she really did. And
Yeah.
that's what you want. And I would say this, some people who can't find that feeling with anybody, their expectations are so high, that can be tricky. And there's a little bit of some, not now, I've learned to screen them out, but in the beginning, I took on some people that were kind of delusional. Their expectations were not realistic. But just wanting to feel something like that, I think that's important. You need to have that, or
Oh
it's just
yeah.
friendship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It'll make sex hard later.
Yeah, no, I mean, and then the people know. I mean, at some point, it was wasted time. She didn't have time to waste with the wrong person. And again, totally kind, wonderful person, but not her person.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you just as a last question because I want to be respectful of your time, but I can't help but ask, you have your own values and your own worldview, and you hold closely to those as a person and with your family and the way you live your life. And then you intersect with all these people who have different worldviews than you and see life differently. And yes, you can give them coaching, but I also am guessing that if they pay you, there also has to be a measure of how do you balance that? Where it's like, okay, this is my worldview. This is what I believe is right. Then I meet this person and they don't think that's right. Do I set up my coaching based on the values I have? Or do you have to tailor the coaching to the person in the sense of values and worldview and things like that, where you may have to compromise on something you hold very closely, but for the other person, they don't?
That is a fantastic question. That is such a great question. I've never been asked that before, but it's such an insightful question. I don't, I learned early on, I had a client that I was looking, trying to find matches for her. And it's always a search, I have a big network, which you're always searching. And there was a guy that I knew that I didn't set her up with because I just didn't think enough of him. I guess I don't know really how else to put it. And she met him on her own and they got married. And I knew him. When I saw that she met him, I said, "Oh my God, I could have done that." But I didn't because I didn't really like the guy. I didn't like him and I didn't set them up. And then I thought, this was early on, I have to separate who I would like and think about who would my client like. And that, this was in like my first year of business because I thought someone who I don't maybe think is so great, my client might. So that level I'm okay with and I've learned, I mean, now it's like, definitely there are clients I'm like, okay, he or she is going for this person. It's not my cup of tea, but I think they would like each other. That's a little different than values a little bit. I had a guy I worked with years ago and I did not, after I started to get to know him, I didn't like him and the women didn't like him. He was inconsiderate. He was late a lot. I mean, I could go on. He was just not a good guy. And after a few setups, I parted ways with him. I just thought you are not respectful of the women's time. You're not a good date. You're very, talk about yourself the whole time. And there was no coaching that was going to fix it. I mean, it's just who he was. And so yeah, if I feel like our values are not aligned as being a decent person and respectful and kind, that's not a client I want or that I'm going to impose on the people that I know that I like. I mean, for so many reasons, I just would not do that to the women or the men I know. And also it's my reputation. I've been doing this a long time and a good portion of my clients come from former clients. It's very word of mouth. And so I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the reputation that I've built for myself. So there is a distinction between just like someone's cup of tea versus someone who just has values that I can't get behind. I don't even know if that's the best illustration, that one story, but yes, if somebody is not honest or just very superficial or, I hate the gold diggers, that's not someone my clients are going to meet. I really am very attuned to that.
That's really cool because I when I was looking at different matchmakers to ask because I had no idea, right? So I'm just looking at all these different matchmakers and reading their bios and looking at their websites, which was interesting because yours was like your LinkedIn page.
Yeah.
You don't have a website, and you're like the reason why is because it's word of mouth, which is pretty unique that that's how you get your business. But I was looking at all the others, and it was very much like not all of them, I don't want to say that, but it's very flashy. right? Or it was like, if you're looking for the perfect one, and like, I guess it sounded to me like I was reading some sort of ice cream ad, and I was like, wow, this sounds really rich. Like, I don't know if I swallowed it, if it would actually be good for
Right.
me. Um, but I've wondered because it seems like it could become such a tempting thing. Because if you can make money, I mean, just do whatever, you know?
Well, I think that some people go into this space because they're like, oh, I've set up a few of my friends, and I love setting up people. And I actually, when I started my business, and I told some people, I'm going to do this, and they said, oh, you're going to be amazing at it. And I said, oh, thanks. And they go, no, really? You remember you set me up in college? And I was like, oh, right, I did set you up in college. I've always tried to. I'm a connector, And I remember when I was at my law firm and I got set up with someone and it wasn't for me, and I came into work the next day and I said to a paralegal, would you be interested in meeting someone? I was set up. I don't think he's for me, but I think you could hit it off with him. And she goes, oh, well, why didn't you feel, I'm open, but why wasn't he a fit? I said, he's a little too politically conservative for me. But she was more like that. I said, I think you guys would hit off. And I remember when they went on the date, I said, text me after to let me know how it went. And she wrote, yay, with like 10 exclamation points. And she was so, and if I felt like it was the next, I was single at the time, obviously myself, because I'd gone on a date, but it was like the next best feeling of like me being interested. I was so happy that they really hit it off. So I've always been connecting people, but it's much different when you're connecting friends versus a business. So I think for the people who connect friends who maybe they're all kind of similar, my clients are all different in their personalities, different in what they're looking for. And when it's a business and someone's paying you, it's just so much harder. So I think some people go into the space thinking, oh, this is so fun, and and I've set up all these people. It's a very hard job. I tell people it's 10 times harder than being a lawyer for me. I think it is so much harder.
It
Um,
sounds like it.
and then I think there are people who, really don't have their clients' best interests. I don't want to badmouth this of people in the space, but they're just not honest, and they prey on people's vulnerabilities. Honestly, people think I'm going to give them this money. They're going to, deliver the perfect person to me on a silver platter, and it's hard. And so I think they start taking shortcuts or misrepresenting people just to get their clients out and look like they're doing something. And my husband is like, he's I don't say he's a saint, but we're Jewish, but he's a saint because he listens to me and he hears these stories and he's like, you work so hard and you care so much. I mean, every time I set a couple up, I am not exaggerating. I'm waiting to get the email after to hear how it went. It does never gets old for me. I don't want to go to
Well,
sleep
I'm
until it
sure.
comes in. And I really, really care. And in that one instance where that date wasn't like, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't the inappropriate comments, I felt so bad that people don't come to me for that. I mean, worst case scenario, 99.9% of the time is great person. I could see where you were going with this, just not a spark. That's like usually the outcome if it's not a love connection. But I think that I love what you said about looking at these sites because they'll promise you the world. I have a 95% success rate. I mean, I've seen that and I'm just like, what does that mean?
What's that based on? Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay, you got people on a date. Like, I find there's so much because there's no way to, disprove that or something. But if you use your common sense, it's just, I mean, the people that come to me when they've talked to other people, they're like, you just seem very real and genuine. And I'm like, I appreciate that you perceive that from me because I really care. And I just, when I had my site up, it was really more just like, oh, do you have a site? But I think it's much harder to build the business my way, the way I've been doing the last few years, but it's so much more fruitful. I guess I don't know the right adjective, but it's so much more just productive for me because again, it is, someone knows someone I know, usually. We have a connection in common. And I think they take it more seriously even because they're like, oh, this is Marnie's business and this is her client and this is
Yeah.
not too long ago, I set up a friend from high school's nephew. I mean, I haven't seen him in years, but his nephew was adorable and wonderful. Unfortunately, it wasn't a love connection, but he was a good guy, and my client liked him. And so I say that it's like I said to my client, his uncle was one of my favorite people in high school. I've set up my husband's cousin's friend from college. I mean, it's like that. And not always. So I have other matchmakers. I occasionally collaborate. I have some scouts. I go out to events. I'll meet people. I mean, not everyone comes with a strong connection, but that's the ideal, connection when that happens. But again, it's not just like, out there for the, random people. It's really like people who know each other, who know someone, and then reach out to me. I don't feel like that wasn't very articulate. I don't know if you're going to edit any of this, but it's really just there's a level of vetting when someone comes through someone you know.
Yeah. I can't imagine what your husband must be like. He must be great.
He's responsible for one of my marriages. He is fantastic. He's very patient. And one time he said, "What about so and so for so and so?" And I was like, no, no. And I said, that's crazy because he had the wrong name. It was like one name and then like the other client had a different like version of it. And I said, no. And he goes, really? You don't think so? And then I said, wait a minute, you're thinking of X client. I said, that's a great idea. And I'm sad that I didn't think of it myself. So he has credit for a marriage. We were at their wedding and, because he hears me sometimes I used to throw a lot of events besides being just on my calls. He would come. I used to do I've done like 50 singles events over, and clients have met people at these events. But he would come and everyone would talk to him, and he's very engaging. So he got it. He knew my clients, less so now because I don't really do as many events. But so yeah, he's really he's an asset. Even just asking, bouncing something off a guy. What picture do you think we should, which picture do you think is better from a guy's perspective? And I'm trying to pick the best pictures to share with my clients, or even like, what would you do in this scenario? Like he's my sounding board. So he's great.
Yeah, he's your free consultant.
Yeah, he's my free
With
consultant.
benefits, right? Well, Marnie, this has been delightful, and it's been so cool to get to talk to you, and I feel like I understand it a little bit more, and I think it's super neat. I mean, I wish I could follow you for a day, and see what you do, but it's really great to meet you. And for anyone listening, I'll have her LinkedIn page linked to this as well. And she's very responsive and happy to talk with you. So if you're in New York or even, I mean, Virginia, New York's not that far from where we are in Virginia. So if there's anyone who's looking or interested in matchmaking, she'd be more than happy to talk with you. So, Marnie, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I was just add one quick thing. I have had people in California or other states, friends of friends, say, "Hey, I'm looking to hire someone. Can you recommend anyone for me?" And sometimes I won't know someone, but I'm happy to talk to them to kind of give them advice about things to ask and to like their due diligence to make sure this person is, legitimate and can really, deliver, because it's an interesting space. And I also just wanted to say, if you ever want to have a part two, because this went so fast, it's a pleasure to be on this. I have so much dating advice and, anything you'd ever want to ask, if you ever want to continue the conversation, I'd be more than happy to.
That is good for me to know. Thank you so much. Well, I
My
hope you
pleasure.
have a good evening and thank you for talking with me.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.